Carmen here, digital editor at Ms., and I'm with Amelia Bonow, the co-founder and co-editor of Shout Your Abortion, the new abortion story collection, which is so fabulous. I love all the different elements here, all the different stories, and then there's also, you know, just such amazing art and sort of very zine-y feel to it. I love it. It's like a yearbook for abortion activists, I feel.
That's my favorite thing that's been said about the book so far. Now, just wait for that tagline to start appearing. Like,
yeah, I'm like, do you want to blurb it? You can blurb it.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone, it's out now. This is it. It's in paperback. It's lovely. And I feel like I'm always starting these with an inception question. So what sort of led, I mean, this feels like a really natural outgrowth of what Shout Your Abortion is and has been as sort of a platform for storytelling about abortion. But what led you to the idea of putting together a book?
So SY has been around since 2015, and the vast majority of projects and collaborations and work that has occurred in those few years has been like really ephemeral and really, you know, a lot of online stuff, but a lot of stuff that's just like a mural on the side of a clinic or a comedy show or just like people doing a thing in their community. And while I think that like the free-form nature of the movement is what makes it feel accessible to so many people, it also just, especially after the election, felt really critical for us to help people find a way in and like create a concrete snapshot of what all of this stuff is and how it fits together in order to just like make it feel like a formula that people can actualize in their lives. And yeah, I think that that's like my greatest hope for the book, is that it's something that you can flip through. And even if you're a person who's like, hell no, I would never like, you know, organize an abortion comedy show. Maybe you are inspired to just like, you know, start a group text with 10 of your friends and be like, hey, I just want you to know that if you guys ever have an abortion, like I want you to know you can talk to me about it. You know, like there's such a scale of ways that we can all change, like start chipping away at this compulsory silence surrounding this issue. And my hope is that this book presents just a huge myriad of them. So yeah.
Totally. And, you know, I loved that, you know, at the end, there's sort of this collection of really inspiring photos of abortion protests through the decades and, you know, just sort of all these resources for people looking to learn more or get more involved. And what sort of next steps would you recommend to activists who pick up this book and think like, I do want to start doing something? Where have some of the activists you've worked with started? Where do you think is a strong place?
That's a great question. I think it's like where we are all feeling right now is like, okay, what do I do? Yeah. It's so overwhelming, like the degree of just how fucked we are. Like certainly legislatively, and like that there's this rising tide, I think, of, you know, just like the empowerment of bigots in every realm of our society. And some of those people are virulent anti-choice, you know, like people that are working harder than ever before to suppress these conversations. So I think it feels like there's so much on the line. It's so critical to like find your voice and do something. And I just sort of like kind of, you know, tied to what I was just saying, it doesn't necessarily feel like there is one path to engagement or like one best form of engagement, because it's all so contingent on like, who are you? Like, do you like to go to rallies, or are you agoraphobic? Like, what are your resources? Do you have money, or do you know how to like make zines? You know, like, have you had an abortion, or do you want to lift people up who have? And just like, what are you good at, and what draws you to this? And it's all just feels really like the answer to that question is very individual. There is one thing though, which you touched on, which is the resources section at the end of the book, which doesn't just contain abortion access resources, but it has like crisis lines from, you know, the RAINN. Like people hit me up all the time, I would say on a, you know, multiple times a week, and either they or someone they know are pregnant, they or someone they know are processing some kind of trauma related to, rape or sexual assault, or just any myriad of the things that we know, like, we are under-resourced as a society to tolerate and to support, and that these things are all peripherally associated to conversations about abortion, because abortion touches so many other things that we're not supposed to talk about and that are related to trauma, and that I think people's level of, I think everyone needs help right now. And so I think that it's really important to know, as a member of your community, whatever that community may be, how to find these resources, so that when people come to you, and especially if you're doing a project that is attempting to catalyze some kind of abortion storytelling or create that space for people to have those conversations, know how to toss people a lifeline when shit gets stirred up, and I'm really proud of the resources section. There's also, there's there's hotlines not only related to dealing with trauma, but also just very practical, this is how you find funding for an abortion you can't afford, and also this is how you find access to abortion regardless of legality, on a state level, on a federal level. I think that it's crucial that we all start talking about how to access abortion when these systems continue to fail, as they already have. We know that in a country where there are 7 states with 1 abortion clinic, and abortion is still just fundamentally a pay-to-play capitalist commodity because of the Hyde Amendment, the system has already failed so many people,
Mm-hmm.
and we already need a new one that is not being, that access is not being mediated by state level regulation, federal regulation, or capitalism. And to me, the natural place to begin having those conversations is hi, you can buy abortion pills on the internet, and have them sent anywhere in the United States. And there are nurse hotlines that are staffed by essentially off the clock abortion care providers who are ready to help people have safe abortions outside of a medical context, and outside of legality as we know it. And so I think we need to know what those hotlines are. We need to know about See a Legal Team, which helps protect people who are most vulnerable to being prosecuted for having illegal, or I would just call them self-managed abortions. And so all that stuff in the resources section, to me, that feels really, really the number one step if you want to participate in this conversation in a different way, is to just know where to find that stuff. And I'm so proud of this resource section. We spent a long time vetting stuff and finding stuff that was really established and easy to use, and that we really trusted, and that felt their values were truly intersectional, and so if anything, I just want you to have that resource page. Even if you aren't going to buy the book, send shoutyourabortion@gmail.com and email, and we'll just mail you a photocopy of the resources page. One of my team members will get mad that I just said that, because I've never, that's
that's the movement. That's how you do it.
It is how you do it.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, sort of, you took, you launched Shout Your Abortion in 2015, and it was sort of this hashtag storytelling campaign, and it has now evolved under your leadership into a full-fledged national organization. And so what are your plans there in this political moment? Where do you hope to take Shout Your Abortion next?
I mean, I think that we want to continue doing what we've been doing, which is, creating places for people to talk about their abortions on their own terms in art, media, and at real life events all over the country. So we keep, that's, I think, always going to be our shit.
The North Star.
Yeah. And that we would like to just continue doing it on a larger and larger scale, and just proliferating awareness of this movement. It is such a conduit, and I think even just the phrase itself, Shout Your Abortion, although it alienates some people at the get-go, it's such an effective conduit to just let people know that this conversation is happening somewhere. And so many people just don't know that. And like, so a lot of what I envision for like our next year of programming, because we do have nonprofit, we're a fully legit organization. We're not technically a nonprofit, but we have nonprofit sponsorship. So we are like official as fuck in all the ways, except for the fact that we really run more like an art collective.
Mm-hmm.
But we have like plans and, and really in the next year, I think that like we want to continue empowering artists to make work about their abortions and all sorts of different projects, like digital stuff and like fashion stuff and just everything. Like we want creative work about abortion in every possible discipline. And we also just want to, like I said, proliferate awareness of this movement, because I think that when people find it, they do stuff. Like it's a thing that so many people are ready to talk about, which is why the movement like exploded in this totally organic way. It wasn't like created by a think tank. It like was people just being like, yeah, we need this. We need to talk about this. And I'm going to go do this in my own life in any number of ways. So yeah, I think that like the answer to that question is just sort of like more, harder, bigger, louder. Yeah.
Awesome.
But same, fundamentally same.
And you sort of touched on this before, this idea that abortion is so connected to all these other issues that we talk about. And I think right now there's a lot of outrage. I think there's also a lot of outrage fatigue. I think there's also a lot of, like you were saying, like, where do I start? There's so much stuff at risk. We're seeing so many attacks. Like just today, the Title IX stuff is coming out right now. And it's literally like I'll schedule one of these, and then by the time it happens, there's like 30 more things I want to talk about with the person. And so what brought you to reproductive justice as, what drove you to sort of pick up this mantle and really run with it?
I studied cultural anthropology in my undergrad, and I had a really incredible feminist anthropology professor, shout out to Harriet Finney at Seattle University. And I took a class from her called Culture and Reproduction. And it was just like the first time that I'd read, it was just a deep dive into feminist anthropological like studies of just like how culture and reproduction interface and sort of form our entire, like it was just like a classic undergrad moment, although I was like old as shit in that program. I think I was like 27 when I graduated, so I just like took my time. But I just had a learning experience where I was like, oh, abortion is like the fundamental basis of human rights. There is no possible, we cannot ever have economic justice, racial justice, gender justice without reproductive freedom. And because it is so overwhelming, like, all of those areas are so fucked. And to me, like abortion feels like a place to start that touches all of those things and like, brings justice to like so many marginalized, groups that I just mentioned, whether we're talking about poor folks or people of color, like, or women, like, or people with uteruses who aren't women. Like, we can't pretend to offer people justice by just like being like, okay, we're going to do socialism now, and that's enough, right? It's like, no, we can't ever offer people, we can't say that we live in a free society if people aren't free to determine if and when they're having children. And everything springs forward from that to me. So that said, so that was, years ago. And then when I had my own abortion in 2014, it was just such an empowering experience. And I was already kind of obsessed with abortion by then. And then like when I got pregnant, I remember like the moment of like looking down at the stick, and I was like surprised that I was pregnant. I did not think that I was pregnant. And I had this like moment of being like, wow, I get to have an abortion. I get to go access this like ancient system of women caring for women. I get to go 6 blocks away from my apartment and the staff at that Planned Parenthood that's taken care of me my entire life is going to give me like excellent, compassionate abortion care. And like, fuck yeah. I feel so empowered by that knowledge. And I know that I'm going to be okay. And this is just going to be a thing that I'm going to do. And it's going to become like a form of power that I take with me, like forward in my life. And it was all of that. And I think that after that experience, I was aware that like my sort of processing of my own abortion was like not totally normative, you know, because I had just like really bypassed the shame factor altogether.
Yeah.
And I
just jumped to fuck yeah.
Yeah. I just jumped straight to fuck yeah. And like, I think that, you know, the impetus for wanting to talk about my experience and ultimately for like inadvertently starting SYA was like wishing that more people had access to the kind of experience that I had, and feeling like the barriers to people having that kind of experience were primarily cultural, you know? Because I live in Seattle, which is one of the most secular, like, you know, liberal places in the country, certainly some of the best abortion laws in the country. Like, you know, I'm a cis white girl that like never had I knew that I was going to be able to pay for it. I knew that the people in my life were going to be supportive. I also knew that I was going to talk about it because I talk about stuff, and that the people in my life were going to be supportive. And like, that's all just an experience that like is so, in aggregate, it's like so rare. It's like dreamy. You know, I had such a cushy, like medical and emotional experience of abortion. And I think that like, I just wanted to evangelize that shit afterwards, you know?
Yes. Well, and you touched on this sort of too, this idea that everyone's identity is so wrapped up in this, and your stories, the stories that you've collected, and especially the stories that you feature in the collection, are very diverse. They come from people of diverse bodies, people of diverse backgrounds and identities and experiences. But what are some of the through lines that you've seen in the years as you've collected abortion stories? What are some of the sort of major takeaways that you think these stories offer activists and advocates who are, you know, trying to figure out where to start with addressing all of these problems that face us?
I would say that's still one of the most common things that people say to me when they are telling me about their own abortion experience is, I didn't feel bad, but I felt kind of bad that I didn't feel bad, which is like a sort of nuanced through line. But like, you know, hundreds of people have said that to me, which I think speaks to my previous point about like, sort of, you know, there not being ever space, even in like progressive feminist communities, for a person to express that they had a positive experience with abortion. And I think that like through, you know, SYA, like, and especially because SYA, like sort of the impetus was my story, which is like so positive. I think that a lot of people felt like it gave them permission to be like, fuck yeah, which is great. And if you feel that way, like, yay, I'm so happy for us. I'm so happy that we are talking about this. I think that like the natural through line that exists, especially in the book. So the book has 40, like there are 40 written stories there, as Carmen said, like from people in like 9 different states, of a really diverse range of identities, and also just like of the circumstances surrounding their experiences. You know, there are people that whose stories are really like heartbreaking, and that those pregnancies were desperately wanted, and that their abortions were medically necessary. And then there are people who have had multiple abortions and don't feel like, and feel super positive about that. And I think that one of the things that I didn't necessarily see coming as we were like collecting the stories for this book, I mean, and I don't know why I didn't see it coming, because it's like, I know that myself and all of the women that I love have been sexually assaulted. I know that we have all had experiences with domestic violence and abuse and substance abuse issues and mental illness. And like, I know that these are all just things we're not supposed to talk about that happen all the time. But one of the things that sort of, like, as I was collecting the stories and editing them with my girl Emily Noakes, who co-edited the book with me and like also did all of the design, is just I would bet that like 70% of the stories in the book involve like the core of their abortion story involves one of those components, like rape or abuse especially, and that was pretty heavy. Even as a person who, like I said, like knows all that all of that shit is normal, like the through line to me though is how many people in the book naturally frame their abortion experience as being a catalyst for them to get away from that stuff, and to like that it was like there are so many people in the book that are like, all this bad stuff was happening, I got pregnant, it was so the worst time for that to be happening because of all this bad stuff that was happening, and then I had an abortion, and that abortion set me free and empowered me to live a life that I never would have otherwise. There are so many people that like explicitly connect their abortion experience with taking care of themselves and with like making a choice for like that their life was of value. People who are in like really degrading bad situations, I think naturally in this book frame their abortion experience as something which made them believe they could love themselves and that they were deserving of care. And so many of those folks also then credit their like processing of their abortion experience, which often like took a long time to get to that place, with their being able to process all that other bad shit that happened. And then many of them go on to be like, and now I'm a clinic escort and I help people, you know, feel held in that moment in their life. And like, you know, this was not a through line that we like created, that we like sought to, you know, architect in some way in this book. This is just naturally the way that like 20 of these stories end up playing out, which I think is a really pertinent point when we think about why the anti-choice movement wants to suppress real people's abortion stories, because abortion helps people live their best lives. And, you know, their entire shit is like lies about how, you know, like abortion regret lies that say that like this damages people and gives us mental illness and that we all feel, and it's like, no, literally 95% of people who have abortions express not feeling regret about their choice. And like when you really start to dive into stories, it actually is a pretty positive experience for a lot of people. And also the negative components are often because of people like you, like because of the conditioning of the anti-choice movement and the stigma that surrounds people. And people often say like, I didn't feel bad, but like, you know, my neighbor saw me at the clinic and shamed me and I had to move. Like, you know, I didn't feel bad, but like my family, you know, kicked me out. Like I didn't feel bad, but the people around me made me feel awful. Yeah. And like, so yeah, that's another reason why, like, that's why it's just about telling the truth, you know? And the only way for them to keep making this lie exist is to make sure that we don't talk to each other. And like, cat's out of the bag, bitches, and like, you can't put us back in the bag because there are too many of us.
Yes. Oh God, that was really powerful. And I mean, and so what do you think now that you have been collecting these stories? And I know I sort of kept thinking when I was thinking about talking to you also about the Me Too movement and about how a lot of us are sort of waiting to see, you know, what will actually come of all of these stories going out. What will, you know, will this actually have this reverberating impact we're hoping it has? And I'm curious, you know, it's so clear that telling abortion stories has very personal, empowering aspect to it. What has the reverberating impact of your work that you've seen? Like, how has it been
like on a personal level or on a,
like sort of in communities and in culture, you know, like
yeah, I mean, you know, that one's like hard for me to, it's hard because I'm just so in it, you know, like
yeah.
And it's hard for me to have perspective on like what the macro cultural effect is. But it's, I mean, I know that it's working in profound ways in people's lives. I know that it sure seems like we're talking more about abortion as a culture than we were
Yes.
a few years ago. I think that like the question you bring up about like, well, what is going to be like the systemic change? Like if we're talking about Me Too or we're talking about SYA, like how much does talking about it like really lead to like increased abortion access or like, you know, better laws to deal with like sexual harassment in the workplace? And like my answer to that is like everyone should find the thing that they want to fight, like the way that they want to fight and do that. So like if you're a person who's like working for systemic change and you're like you just want to work on policy, you just want to work on abortion access, that's totally great. I like support you. I am not like a wonk, but I'm glad that you are. For me, I think that it's outrageous to think that we will ever have just abortion legislation in a society that doesn't talk about abortion. And I think that it's outrageous to think that we can come up with like, you know, a less predatory way to fuck each other, like that, or like that we can like imagine a world where, you know, women aren't just like being raped and like assaulted by their bosses, and that we're not all just like people that carry around a million of those stories. I don't know how we would come up with a better version of normal that is institutionalized and that is offering us like protection in the form of policy in our workplace if we like literally aren't talking about what the normal is now. And like I think that that's what both of these movements are seeking to do, Me Too and SYA, is like, hi, let's just talk about what the reality is, because that has been suppressed so effectively for so long. And like that silence is what's allowing the bad stuff to proliferate without any checks on it. So yeah, that's what I think about that.
And you know, I'm thinking too that I do feel like we're talking about abortion. I feel like the conversation has also changed. You know, we saw a lot of very pro-choice candidates, like sort of people who go beyond that, you know, yeah, sure, support safe and legal abortion, people who do celebrate abortion access, and people who are connected to groups like NARA and Planned Parenthood, who used to work at those groups, who do that activist work getting elected on Tuesday, last week during the midterms. We also saw two very, very obscene anti-abortion laws in Alabama and West Virginia, one of which gives constitutional protections to the unborn. And you know, it's when I was thinking about the book and how Shout Your Abortion started in 2015 because of congressional attacks on Planned Parenthood, which are now so frequent that, you know, we kind of just expect them. Yeah. And yet in the midst of all of this, there's always this conversation about, you know, do we need to make abortion the defining issue of a party or a cause or, you know, what kind of policy change do you think sort of amplifies the work you're doing in smashing that stigma around abortion? Like, what do you think? You know, I think the time has come for proactive policies. I know we were talking before the interview about a conversation I had recently with Dr. Willie Parker, and we were just really talking about how, you know, we can't keep reacting and pushing back against them pushing us. We need to start sort of proactively carving out that space for abortion rights and expanding abortion rights. So I'm just curious, like, what do you think folks in Washington, the wonks, could be doing to stop feeding that narrative of shame and sort of start celebrating and uplifting abortion too? Yeah,
I mean, like, to me, the natural, and, you know, I'm not like I'm not a wonk, I'm not like a political strategist. I think that I only want to like support a politician that is talking about overturning Hyde. I think that if we're not being visionary in our approach, we are conceding to the opposition. And I think that, like, especially right now, it's so clear that, like, I don't know, it's just, we just have to push forward. There's no, I don't think, and, you know, like, there's so much talk about, like, well, it's like so many think pieces that are just like, should we be like making the tent big enough to accommodate like anti-choice Democrats? And like, that is just, it's so insulting, and I'm not even going to like dignify it by like dismantling it. But like, there's absolutely no research whatsoever that like would lead anyone to believe that that's what people want. 70% of Americans support Roe versus Wade. 1 in 4 women in America has an abortion. Abortion is not really a controversial issue.
Yeah.
And like, we know that because people are having abortions. And those people are not Democrats. Those people are everyone. Like, every single kind of person has abortions. This country relies on abortion. And I think that like, we need to, when I think about like what SYA can do to support the work of politicians and people that are like working on the ground to expand legislation, I think that we need to, as constituents, by talking about our abortions and by demanding, you know, like, not only demanding like that Roe stays in place, but demanding that abortion be free and accessible and destigmatized. Like, we are communicating to our elected officials that like they're on the hook for anything less than that, which I think truly will be a popular strategy. Like, because that is where people's actual values and needs are.
Yes.
It is like, we need abortion, we want abortion, we have abortions. We're now starting to talk about them and communicate that. And yeah, like, anything less than that is way insufficient. And we're gonna primary all their asses.
I'm just like, I'm speechless because I love it. Yes.
Good. Do you agree?
Yes.
Are you?
Oh yeah.
I
mean, and you know, I think abortion is obviously one of the issues that we pay so much attention to here at Miz, and we've been covering for decades. And I know that a lot of times when I talk to, you know, the women who have guided me through this movement and sort of raised me in this space, that there is sort of this idea of like, I can't believe we're even still talking about this basic level idea of like, do people like abortion? Is abortion popular? And
do people like it, or
and yet, like you said, like, you know, the numbers show that, you know, Roe v. Wade is more popular than many of the judges on the Supreme Court now who could choose to overturn it at any point. And Roe v. Wade is more popular than most presidential candidates, most congressional candidates. Like, and you know, and I love that too when I was reading Lindy West wrote the foreword to the book, and when I was reading it, and she was sort of talking about how, you know, abortion rights folks have been pushed into this corner by this framing of, you know, abortion as the killing of an unborn, blah, blah. And this idea that, at the same time, everyone has abortions. Republican women, Democratic women, women who don't vote. And, you know, and it's sort of very interesting to see abortion used as a political device. When in reality, it's just a part of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lindy says in that essay, like, it's not that people have an issue with abortion, it's that abortion has a branding issue, you know, like, which is so real. And like, I think that unfortunately the left has been a part of allowing that to happen, you know? And
well, and that's why you're here. That's why you're here.
That's why we're all here.
And that's what the abortion yearbook, your abortion is for. I mean, I think these stories just so illustrate, like you said, how powerful abortion can be and how important it is for everyone to control their destinies. And I think, you know, that's what I love about this book and the work that you're doing, is that is where the ephemeral, I think, meets the political, is this idea that abortion is not, you know, the 10 the 10-minute wait in the room and the procedure. Abortion is literally
the whole rest of your life.
Yes, this thing that allows you to really say, this is what I want to do, and this is how I want to be, and who I want to be, and I can control the circumstances of my life. And I think that's just so powerful and important. So thank you so much.
Oh my
for
God, thank
all
you
that you
so
do
much.
and for taking the time to talk to us and be here today.
Such a pleasure.
And I know it's not on camera, but for bringing all of this amazing Shout Your Abortion swag, which you all should go to all the events so that you can snag these stickers and pins and patches that I'm going to steal before.
And free emergency contraception every stop
also
on our
very
book tour.
Important.
Bring a date.
Start stockpiling your Plan B now at a Shout Your Abortion event.
Why not? Why would you not do that?
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
And this book and this movement is forever dedicated to abortion care providers.
Yes.
Because they gave so many of us the whole rest of our lives. So it's all for you. Especially you, Dr. Willie.
I'm like, I'll send it to him.
You got it.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Until next time.